This podcast is brought to you by Three Rivers Energy Partners. In today's episode of Digest This.
Strait of Hormuz removed close to 20% of global LNG supply from the market.
You're arguing for public health benefit. What methane did it prevent from entering the atmosphere? What waste did it divert?
Because if you're a corporate buyer, LNG says, we can keep the system supplied.
Welcome to Digest This, Unpacking Our Sustainable Future, where we dive deep into the latest developments in sustainability and renewable energy. Join us in exploring the pioneering solutions and technologies that are shaping our future. Now, let's dive into today's episode.
Welcome to the show. Emily, I cannot get over this one number from the IEA report. The disruption through the Strait of Hormuz removed close to 20% of global LNG supply from the market. 20%. That's not a blip. That's like pulling one wheel off the shopping cart and then acting surprised when everybody starts grabbing for the handle.
And that 20% is exactly why this DOE announcement matters beyond the press release language. On April 28th, Secretary Chris Wright was in Dubrovnik announcing billions in private capital for Central and Eastern Europe, plus this new Trump Peace Pipelines framework to build more gas infrastructure and expand the region's ability to import U.S. LNG. If you are a policymaker staring at a 20% supply shock, more import capacity suddenly sounds like national insurance.
Right, and the DOE's framing is not subtle. They're saying the U.S. leads the world in LNG exports. They're on track to more than double exports within the next decade, and they rolled out specific pieces. The Southern Interconnection gas pipeline with Bosnia and Herzegovina and Croatia, nuclear cooperation with Croatia, even an SMR feasibility study. It's this whole package of energy security, industrial policy, geopolitics, all bundled together.
Let me grab the phrase, more than double exports within the next decade, because that changes the mood of the market conversation. When governments hear that, they start treating gas as strategic infrastructure, not just a commodity. And then the question for our world is, if all gas molecules are suddenly politically important, does renewable natural gas get elevated too?
That's the tension. Because in a boardroom, I've seen this happen fast. Somebody hears gas security, somebody else hears domestic supply, and suddenly RNG gets invited into the conversation almost by accident. Not because they woke up passionate about dairy digesters, but because global LNG just reminded them molecules matter.
Although invited into the conversation is not the same as understood. That's the part I'd push on. LNG and RNG are not competing on the same field. LNG in these sources is about shipping lanes, import terminals, pipelines, regional alliances. RNG is tiny by comparison. It is not going to replace a 20% global LNG shortfall. That would be the wrong expectation from the start.
Totally. And actually, that's the surprising part. RNG may become more interesting precisely because it is not a global bulk commodity. If LNG volatility comes from choke points like Hormuz and damaged liquefaction infrastructure, the IEA says damage in Qatar could delay the global LNG expansion wave by at least 2 years, with a cumulative loss of around 120 billion cubic meters from 2026 to 2030. Then the humble local gas project starts to look kind of beautiful.
The 120 billion cubic meters between 2026 and 2030 figure is the one that sticks with me, because it tells buyers this isn't just a bad month. It's potentially years of tighter markets through 2026 and 2027. And when the market gets nervous for years, buyers get more willing to ask a different question. Not just what's cheapest today, but what can I count on that's close to home?
Exactly. So, Chapter 1, basically, LNG is moving because security fears got real fast. But once gas becomes strategic, RNG gets pulled into the room. The danger is it gets lumped in with generic gas. The opportunity is it gets revalued as a domestic, lower carbon, resilient molecule.
I always find RNG harder to explain than solar or wind. Solar, you point at a panel. Wind, you point at a turbine. RNG is like, okay, imagine landfill gas, dairy manure, municipal organics, methane capture, pipeline interconnection, Environmental attributes, people's eyes glaze over by syllable 4.
Yes, solar is a selfie. RNG is a plumbing diagram. But here's the funny thing from working with businesses. RNG is often easier to use than it is to explain because it can fit into existing gas systems. A company doesn't necessarily need to rebuild everything the way it might for full electrification. That's a huge practical advantage.
And that practical advantage is why I don't think RNG's opportunity is volume. It's differentiation. It's local. It's renewable. It's often tied to waste streams that already exist and already cause problems. Dairies, landfills, municipal organics. So the value proposition isn't we are another giant source of gas. It's we solve methane, waste, and emissions in one project.
Let me try to explain that back maybe a little too bluntly. LNG sells scale and geopolitics. RNG sells story and specificity.
Almost. Story, yes, but not just branding story. Measurable decarbonization story. LNG in the DOE release is about export leadership, pipelines, import capacity, strategic alliances. RNG can show up differently. Methane reduction, circularity, Scope 1 or Scope 3 emissions reductions, and domestic fuel production linked to waste management. That's not cosmetic differentiation. That's a different product logic.
That's really important. Because if you're a corporate buyer, LNG says, we can keep the system supplied. RNG says, we can help you hit climate targets while using infrastructure you already have. Those are different doors into the same building.
And here's the counterintuitive part. Being small can actually sharpen RNG's value. If you are too small to win the scale war, you stop trying to be the cheapest, undifferentiated molecule on Earth. You focus on premium uses, on policy-linked uses, on customers who care that the gas is renewable and domestic and tied to avoided methane.
Yes, this is where people miss it. They hear tiny compared with LNG and think, therefore irrelevant. No, tiny can mean targeted. A landfill or dairy digester project isn't trying to redraw European energy security architecture. It's trying to create a reliable, lower carbon fuel pathway with very specific environmental benefits. That's a different game, and sometimes a better margin game.
And easier to defend, frankly. Because once you tie a project to waste management and methane capture, you're not just arguing for energy supply. You're arguing for public health benefits, agricultural waste solutions, municipal organics management, a whole cluster of outcomes. RNG has to win by being more than gas.
Which is maybe the line buyers need tattooed on the procurement memo. RNG is not just gas with better PR. If it's treated that way, it loses. If it's treated as a tool for decarbonization and circularity that happens to move through gas infrastructure, then it starts to make strategic sense.
And that framing matters even more now because the larger gas conversation is getting louder, more national security oriented, more price sensitive. In a louder room, nuance dies first unless somebody insists on it.
So here's the fight, really. When politics shifts toward more gas is good, that can help any project that increases domestic supply. But it can also hurt RNG if policymakers, regulators, or buyers get lazy and treat all pipeline gas as basically the same thing. Then the premium case for renewable gas gets crowded out by sheer LNG scale.
Right, because the DOE release is very clearly celebrating abundance. More infrastructure, more exports, more jobs, more investment. That's a powerful narrative. If that narrative becomes, don't overcomplicate it, just get more molecules moving, RNG risks being folded into a fossil gas expansion story that erases its environmental distinction.
And if you're an RNG developer, that should worry you. Not because gas demand is bad for you, demand is good, but because undifferentiated demand rewards the cheapest, biggest source. And RNG is usually not going to win a raw commodity knife fight with LNG scale supply.
But the upside is real too. The IEA report says Europe and Asia saw prices jump to their highest levels since January 2023 during the March volatility, after the Strait of Hormuz disruption, and the 8% year-on-year decline in global LNG production. Those numbers tell businesses something very practical. Global gas can be exposed to shocks you do not control.
And that's where long-term contracts come in. The IEA specifically notes that a diversified portfolio of long-term contracts can help importers mitigate price volatility during disruptions. Different context, yes, but the principle travels. If you're a company or utility, domestic RNG contracts can look less like a climate add-on and more like resilience planning.
Exactly. Not a replacement for everything. Let's be careful there. But a hedge with co-benefits. Resilience plus decarbonization plus waste management is a stronger pitch in a volatile market than decarbonization alone. That's the opening.
All right, so here's the takeaway I'm leaving with. When the world gets loud about gas security, the easy mistake is to treat every molecule like it's interchangeable. But it's not.
Exactly. The difference isn't rhetorical, it's measurable. Where did the gas come from? What methane did it prevent from entering the atmosphere? What waste did it divert? What other downstream environmental impacts is it preventing? And can those benefits be verified and tracked in a way that regulators and buyers trust?
Because if those questions don't get asked and answered, renewable gas risks getting swallowed by the generic label of gas, right when it should be standing out the most.
And if we do get it right, RNG becomes more than an emissions tool. It becomes a resilience tool. Local supply, waste solutions, real decarbonization, and fewer surprises from the other side of the world.
That's it for today's episode of Digest This, Unpacking Our Sustainable Future. Thanks for listening. If you found this useful, share it with someone who still thinks all gas is the same gas.
And follow Three Rivers Energy Partners on LinkedIn for more updates. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to Digest This, Unpacking Our Sustainable Future, a Three Rivers Energy Partners podcast. Three Rivers Energy Partners is a renewable energy company that empowers organizations with the ability to create a sustainable future by converting organic waste streams into renewable energy and resources. To get the latest episode of Digest This, or to find out more about Three Rivers Energy Partners, visit threeriversenergy.com or find us on LinkedIn, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. The sustainable future is being created right now. Keep exploring and keep up to speed with the latest in renewable energy and sustainability. See you next time.